Don't like the sound of that.
Call an ambulance! Call an ambulance! But not for me!
Man, it's a damn shame that Raven Software is just delegated to Call of Duty these days, because they used to make some dope ass shit back in the day. This game being the most notable aside from Ultimate Alliance, which I have a video on that everybody should watch. The game we're looking at today is Singularity, one of the most frequent games brought up when people talk about underrated games of the 360 PS3 era. Despite having a AAA budget and following the gritty FPS trend at the time, this game didn't sell for shit. I suspect it was because of poor marketing, because personally, I don't remember any advertisements of this game back in the day. Everything from Activision at the time was Call of Duty, which I guess isn't too dissimilar to now. The game had a rocky development, almost getting cancelled at some point, so I'm guessing Activision just didn't have much faith in the project. This was kind of the last straw for Raven Software 2, since the year prior they made that Wolfenstein reboot that also tanked in sales. What sucks about all this were the mass layoffs that followed. We haven't seen an original game from these guys in over a decade, which I feel is a loss to gaming since they're clearly creative. This game in particular could have been the start of a new interesting series, as what's here already is pretty damn solid. So Singularity sees you playing as a U.S Marine named Renko, whose squad is sent on a reconnaissance mission to an island called Cortoga 12. The island used to belong to the Soviet Union, where they discovered a powerful new resource of energy called E99. You see a lead engineer named Borisov and his crew tried to utilize this new energy to win the Cold War back in the 50s, but unfortunately for them, E99 is not a resource to be fucked with. Everybody on the island met their maker, as some experiments with the resource went terribly wrong. Of course, the Russian government tries to sweep it under the rug, but the US managed to detect some weird shit going on there. On the reconnaissance mission, some electromagnetic surge emits from the island, bringing down the troops. So now Renko is stuck on the island, where he begins to phase in and out of time. He phases back in time, just in time to save this guy named Demichev from dying in a burning building. Turns out that was a mistake though, since when he gets back to the present, he discovers that that asshole now rules the world. You're freed from his capture by some resistance lady named Catherine that thinks you're the one that can bring him down using the TMD. The TMD is a time manipulation device that was developed by Borisov that does what it's named. For the rest of the game, you use the TMD to set history right by going back to 1955 at various points. Also in the present day, you're not just dealing with Demichev's army, but also some things that are probably not human. So this game still looks pretty damn good, man. There was a lot of detail put in these environments, much of which tells a story without even saying nothing. Mad debris and burnt bodies all over the place, Soviet propaganda splattered wherever you look. This game is very gray and brownish with the color, which is something I usually dislike about games of this era, but it really works here to emphasize the highly industrial architecture of Cortoga. The whole island is essentially a giant lab to extract this E99 stuff, so it does make sense. Also, if anyone's peeped old Soviet cities, they weren't exactly full of rainbows and sunshine. Cortoga 12 really does feel like a place lost in time, doubly so with the skies being shrouded with this brown fog. Feels like you're about to enter the gates of hell or some shit. Something is definitely wrong here. This is in contrast to where you go back to 1955 with these labs that have this light, campy feel to them. A lot of these environments look like they're straight out of an old James Bond film or something. It's pretty neat. One of my favorite things about this game is that it really takes its time building this feeling of dread in the beginning. It's downright a horror game with how cerebral it is. The creepy ambient music already indicates that something's not right, but then you read these notes and listen to these audio logs of people crying for help, and you slowly realize that you're in the domain of these mutated freak monsters. These guys aren't that scary on their own, but they're propped up by some well-timed jump scares. The fuck was that? It also helps that at this point in the game, you're only armed with a weak ass pistol with barely any ammo. Almost wish that the rest of the game was like this because this is some good atmosphere. It is a false impression though, because as soon as you get an assault rifle, this game turns into Wolfenstein real quick. Guess this is a good jumping off point to get into the gameplay. So I've had this game sold to me as Bioshock meets Half-Life 2 meets Wolfenstein meets Resistance meets Fear. Hell, I've even heard some people name drop Metro, Time Shift, and Call of Duty when trying to describe this game. I mean, it's not unfounded as this game is clearly influenced by those games, but after playing through it myself, I don't really think it feels like any of them. At least, it doesn't wholesale copy any of those games like people imply. The best comparison is probably a happy medium between Metro and Wolfenstein, but even then, Singularity has its own thing going. Of course, there's the standard corridor shooting where the game throws a bunch of weak soldiers at you to mow down, but you also got the TMD on your left hand here that spices things up a bit. You're able to kill soldiers in mid-combat by aging them, which is not really something I've seen in any other game. You also got some force powers and the ability to turn soldiers into some mutated creatures, which admittedly isn't that useful, but pretty cool to do anyway. Though the TMD is the main gimmick of this game and does assist in some combat situations, it mostly takes a backseat to the shooting. The shooting is pretty solid in that it feels pretty similar to the Call of Duty games of that era. However, it's kind of disappointing that the TMD doesn't play a bigger role in the combat. It really doesn't take long for your weapons to outpace the TMD in terms of offensive utility, and even by the end of the game when you max it out, your guns are way more effective at killing things. It's to the point where you can actually go through this whole game just using your guns for combat and leaving the TMD for puzzles. There's barely any synergy between the two mechanics, which I think was a missed opportunity. This is definitely no Bioshock where you're incentivized to use everything you have, which is why it's confusing to me why this gets compared to that game so often. Not to mention Bioshock is a little more open-ended with the level design, while this game is mega linear. I'm making this point sound like a negative, but it's actually not. The linearity allows the developers to pace things out the way they want, and luckily Raven knew how to pace this game out pretty well. You rotate on fighting the soldiers and the monsters, and the game never lingers on any of them for too long. There's a large variety of enemy types from both too, which keeps each encounter fresh. They brought over the gore from Wolfenstein, which makes popping these guys oh so satisfying. Now that's barbecue chicken. Something that doesn't make sense though is that sometimes you'll clearly shoot these dudes in the head, but for whatever reason their arms will fly off instead. Your arsenal of weapons is pretty solid. Of course you got the standard assault rifle and shotgun and stuff, but you also got some cool shit like the Death X launcher and the Seeker, especially the Seeker. It's a gun where you control the bullet after firing, which leads to some ridiculous kills. Oh no, I missed! Psych! With this many destructive weapons under your belt, it's weird that you're limited to just 2 weapons at a time. Made sense in the beginning when the game was pure horror, but then when you turn into a one-man army, it doesn't really make sense anymore. I like the power trip, but this game does lean into being too easy. The damage you do off of just 2 damage upgrades is way too much. You melt through everything like butter, even the mutated monsters who are supposed to be more dangerous than the soldiers. There's some moments where the game wants you to use stealth around these revert things, but what's the point when you could just deal with them like this? Ironically, the enemy that I had the most trouble with were these damn ticks. I didn't die much in this game, but the few times I did were all from these little shits. They're deceptively quick and did more damage than I thought. When you're not engaged in the combat, you're generally using the TMD to get through some obstacles, mostly moving these boxes which are used to solve most of the game's puzzles. I say puzzles in quotes because it's mostly just opening doors and using the box to reach paths that you can't jump to. Considering the cool concept of aging and de-aging objects in your environment, you would think that there would be some more interesting uses of it, but nope, just move the box. It's a shame too, since manipulating the age of the objects around you is visually pretty cool. I have a sinking suspicion that there was more to be done with it. Singularity on the whole is on the short side at only 7 hours, and it definitely feels like there was more to be done. The game really rushes through its last third where it just force feeds you a bunch of new perks back to back. The last new weapon you acquire is the Death X launcher, but by the time you get it, the ending is like right around the corner. Not to mention, by the end of the game, the vast majority of your weapons aren't going to be upgraded at all. This game just goes by way too quickly to be a jack of all trades. To hammer home this point, there's like no big boss battle at the end, which feels pretty strange. Now, I don't think that every game needs a big climactic boss battle at the end, but considering that everything gets crazier the deeper into the island you go, it would have been fitting. Not to mention that this game already had 2 bosses, so it's just like, might as well cap it off with something paramount.
We can sleep soundly, knowing that E99 will protect us from the evils of the West and make the Soviet Union a safe and dominant superpower.
So there's usually 3 time travel stories that you see in media. One is a fixed timeline where no matter what a character does in the past, the future is set in stone. The second is a dynamic timeline where one small change in the past can fuck up everything in the future. And the last one is a multiverse where there's multiple versions of the same timeline, and changes in a timeline can create a separate new timeline. The reason I'm saying all this is because this game tries to do all 3, which results in some things not making sense. So the drastic changes with Demichev being world leader and Borisov being alive only makes sense if Renko is hopping into a different timeline whenever he goes back to 1955. There's 2 reasons for this. For one, it's clear that before Renko goes back to 1955 for the first time, Demichev wasn't the world leader with the events of the world playing out as in real life. The second is Demichev killing Borisov before the Kartoga 12 disaster. If Renko saving Borisov from that event happened during the same timeline as Renko saving Demichev, then Borisov would be alive, which he clearly isn't. As you can see by this poorly drawn timeline I made, the events of this game start to make sense when you factor in new timelines being made whenever Renko goes back, at least until the game decides that it shouldn't when you come back to the same timeline after charging the bomb in the past. Same when you come back after destroying the Singularity, but then the game goes back to it after killing yourself in the past? Wait, what? If this is all the same timeline, then why wasn't the player Renko killed by this Renko in the beginning of the... You know what? I'm thinking way too hard about this. I was interested in the plot regardless of it being pitch perfect, so it doesn't fucking matter. This is definitely a story that puts the plot first though. There's really nothing to these characters outside of doing what they need to do to save the world. They're all pretty flat. The choice at the end to either kill or join Demichev is also pretty arbitrary, as siding with Borisov is really the only correct choice here. He's clearly been helping you throughout the game with no ill intentions, unlike Demichev, who's constantly been sending his goons to kill you. Not to mention that the guy looks and sounds like a Bond villain. He's like the most obviously evil Russian villain ever.
That's better. How is it you haven't aged a day in 50 years? There is only one explanation. The TMD, where is it?
I like that there's an option to kill them both though.
My God, he's dead. Captain, you just killed the most powerful man in the world. But this changes nothing. To correct history, you must go back in time and... No, Captain!
So yeah, that's Singularity. Not really an underrated masterpiece, but a pretty solid game that was unfortunately overlooked. There was some great ideas here with the time manipulation, time travel narrative, and creepy atmosphere. Unfortunately, it doesn't really flesh out any of these ideas, which can make it often feel like a lesser version of games that do. Still, I do recommend this game for anyone that's into games like Metro, Wolfenstein, and even Call of Duty. Anyway, that's all I gotta say about this. Until next time.